You pointed out that global economics is not a zero-sum game, and another theme that comes across in your writing is that essentially if we are going to have a prosperous, a peaceful 21st century that deals with the major crises that we face, such as climate change, we are going to have a world that cooperates, a world of mutual respect, and a world where we are sort of capable of, where countries are capable of understanding one another. And in the rhetoric that you hear in the United States about, I mean, Donald Trump openly says China is our enemy. That's his quote, the rest of the world is ripping us off. It is really quite the opposite of the story that you're telling. I mean, you tell a story of us as all inhabiting one planet and a need to sort of work things out. In the United States, the Trumpian narrative is we inhabit a world of enemies. Those enemies need to be tamed or destroyed. We need to build up our ability to crush them militarily if necessary. So it would seem that much of the story told in the United States is really going in the opposite direction of the one that you feel generates the understanding necessary to live well in the 21st century.
Well, you're absolutely right about that. But I can fully understand why Donald Trump wants to try and improve the livelihoods of the bottom 50% of Americans. I think that's a noble goal that he has. I can understand why he wants to make American industries more competitive and reindustrialize America. That's also an understandable goal. But I think he will find that the best way to achieve those goals is actually to work with the rest of the world. And one thing I've learned after studying geopolitics for 55 years is that you got to be cold and calculating if you're going to succeed in geopolitics. And if you're emotional, then you're at a major disadvantage. So, for example, how did China become so wealthy so quickly? What it did was that it worked closely with the United States, even though technically, even during parts of the Cold War, the U.S. was an adversary. China worked with the United States to grow its economy. And I think that's one thing that is taboo in the United States, that actually the best way for United States to regenerate its economic growth and to make it grow faster is not to try and bring down China, but to work with China. Just as at the time when you were worried about Japanese cars taking over United States, what do? You have voluntary export restraints. You encourage the Japanese to set up factories, Toyota factories, Nissan factories, Honda factories in the United States. The same thing can be done with China. It can only be done if you are rational and calculating in your moves and not emotional and say, oh no, we can never work with China. Why can't you work with China? If working with China is going to bring benefits to the American people, why not work with them? Because at the end of the day, it's very clear that all efforts to stop the rise of China by the United States are going to fail. And you cannot stop a 4,000-year-old civilization that has its own civilizational cycles. And as it is rising, just by depriving them of this technology or that technology is not going to stop the rise of China.
And you point out that for most of human history, the Chinese and Indian economies were among the largest in the world. They have the largest global population. And so to try and reverse the trend towards a more equal balance of power in the world, you argue is futile.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fact that everyone should know, that from the year 1 to the year 1820, for 1800 out of the last 2,000 years, the two largest economies of the world have always been those of China and India. And it's only in the last 200 years that Europe has taken off and North America has taken off. And the last 200 years of Western domination of world history have been a major historical aberration. And all aberrations come to a natural end. So it's perfectly natural to see the return of China and India. But what's important to emphasize is that the reason why China and India are coming back is that they are studying, absorbing, and implementing Western pillars of wisdom. And that's why they're succeeding. And paradoxically, at a time when, for example, China, a communist party-run country, is discovering the virtue of free trade agreements, and free trade agreements have enabled China to become one of the fastest growing economies in the world, the United States is walking away from free trade agreements. But this is where economics 101 theory is right. The United States should be signing more free trade agreements and not walking away from them.
Now, you mentioned there that China being a Communist Party-run country, but one of the points that you make in your book, Has China Won, is that one of the major misunderstandings of China comes from seeing it as an ideologically communist entity in the kind of classic Marxist-Leninist sense.
Well, I think, anybody who thinks that China is a communist country should go visit China. I mean that literally. Every American who believes that should go visit it. I have actually visited Moscow in 1976. And trust me, that place was so controlled, so oppressed. And when you went into the biggest department store in Moscow, right? And you wanted to buy a toothbrush. And I'm not exaggerating. They had a huge cabinet, and you had one toothbrush separated from the other toothbrush by 1 foot. Even the toothbrushes were scarce commodities. And probably when a small 7-Eleven in the United States has more toothbrushes than a large department store in Moscow. Everything was scarce. Now, you go to China today, and you will see the most advanced economy in the world in terms of how it produces both private goods and public goods. If you go and see the infrastructure of China, you begin to realize that after going from Kennedy Airport to Beijing Airport, you're going from a third world airport in the United States to a first world airport in China. And by the way, incidentally, also a first world airport in New Delhi and Mumbai. So there are areas in which Asia has surged ahead, clearly, of the United States. And the United States should consider the possibility that it could possibly try to emulate what the East Asian economies have done.
偷偷告诉大家，我最近发现了新法宝 Royal Face 逆时奇迹系列，它有活肤露、全效精华，还有精华霜。尤其我皮肤比较偏干，所以我非常的注重保湿。保湿做得好，肌肤自然烹饪。提亮肤色更年轻，抚平皱纹超有感，而且气色变好。用心保养，每天都更美一点。美吧。